Now that my LLM's in production, the next question I need to ask is how do I know if it's performing as expected and if its inferences are hitting the mark? And for that, Wallaroo has an LLM monitoring solution, which we call our LLM Listeners. The idea with LLM Listeners is that as my model is serving inferences in production, it's generating rich logs that I can use to get an idea of how it's performing. Then I have one or more LLM listener agents. These can be traditional NLP models. These could be other LLMs. They could be simple rules-based systems. They can really be anything that I want to use to generate a score on how my LLM is performing. From there, these listeners can be run to generate those scores on a regular basis or even in line alongside my model. And from there, those generated metrics can be monitored to get an idea of how my LLM is performing in production. Next, let's take a look at these listeners at work. And so I can switch to another workspace here that has my LLM listeners in it. If I look at the pipelines here, I can see I have two pipelines for my listeners, one around hallucination scoring and one around toxicity scoring. And if I look at my workloads, I can see that I have these listener workloads running on a regular basis. I can click on my hallucination scoring listener and I can see what the status is of any runs that I have queued up. Here I can see that my daily run for today was successful. As my listener workloads are being run and scores are being generated around my LLM's performance, I can monitor these scores by clicking into one of the pipelines, for example, the hallucination scoring one here, and looking at the Insights tab. This will allow me to see what these scores look like for my hallucination scoring for a specific time period. And so if I take a look at a couple of weeks here, I can see that I have some periods where the score is very low and then some periods of higher hallucination scores coming in. I can drill down into any one of these points to see what the distribution of those scores look like and reconcile that back against any pipeline logs. If, based on the scores that I'm seeing here, I want to revise that model that's in production, Wallaroo makes that easy as well. In the case of higher levels of hallucination, like we're seeing here, I may consider adding a RAG-based system to my LLM to ground some of those predictions with context that is pertinent to me. And so if I want to go ahead and deploy that in Wallaroo, I can see that I follow largely the same steps. I'll upload an embedding model, in this case BGE, in exactly the same way as I did my Llama model earlier. And then I can upload a revised version of my Llama model that is meant to incorporate this RAG system into its predictions. And if I take a look at the model.py file itself, I can see that I've just modified the predict function to perform my vector search and add that context section to my prompt. The use here of Wallaroo's custom framework makes it really easy to customize my inference logic to add things like RAG, prompt engineering, or anything else that I need for my model. Once those are both uploaded and packaged, I can move on to my deployment configuration. This is going to look largely the same as before, except now I'll have an entry for each of my two models and decide what hardware I want to allocate to each of them. From there, I can go ahead and actually perform a hot swap on my pipeline. Performing this as a hot swap will both ensure that my pipeline construct itself and any metadata and logs therein are maintained, even though I'm changing the model under the hood, and it will also allow me to do so without ever bringing down my pipeline endpoint. I do this by clearing my pipeline, adding my two model steps for BGE and Llama, and then recalling deploy with my revised deployment configuration. When I do so, those changes will be locked in, the resources will be allocated, and then when they're ready, the hot swap will take place from pointing at my original model to these new ones. And seamlessly, I'll have my new models in production behind that same pipeline. I can test this new pipeline version out with the same prompt as before and see that this time it's using my context to come back with movie recommendations that are actually in my database that I have. Now that my hot swap has been performed, I can see that my pipeline URL remains the same, and I can return to my Wallaroo Operations Center UI to take a look at that same pipeline and see that now the two new models that are here are reflected and a new pipeline version has been logged to capture that change. From here, I can also look at the metrics tab to see what traffic through this pipeline has looked like and see those individual logs and inferences therein. This allows me to ensure that healthy life cycle keeps going and allows me to monitor what those inferences look like before and after adding my RAG component, as well as see if any future changes could be necessary down the road. And so today we've seen how we can use Wallaroo AI's universal AI inference platform to deploy my own LLMs, how I can deploy a quantized LLM specifically to ARM hardware, and how I can continually monitor and update those LLMs in production as needed with the help of LLM listeners and Wallaroo's hot swapping functionality.